Battle of the Tenth.
Thank you.
Which is going to be the 1st of October, which is coming up this year. The Bicentennial for the Battle of the Tenth. Now, the Kentuckians got a little payback there. We killed Tecumseh, the leader of the Indian Confederation. So his confederation fell apart with his death.
That was the end of the Indians.
That was the end of the Indians' commitment to the British. After that, it was just mainly small skirmishes and a few other big battles among the Americans and the British. No Native Americans were in the war after that. When Tecumseh was killed, that was the end of it for them. So, does anybody know what the last battle of the War of 1812 was?
Battle of New Orleans.
Very good. Very Okay, Michael. Great, great. Who was the commanding officer?
Jackson.
Who?
Andrew Jackson.
That's right, the old Andy Jackson. Old Hickory, old Hawkface. That's what the Kentuckians and Tennesseans called him, old Hawkface. He was commanding general.
But the Battle of New Orleans did not happen until now.
Right.
It happened
After the war ended.
What happened was, the Battle of New Orleans was a waste. The British came to the Americans wanting a peace treaty, and they signed the peace treaty in Belgium at Ghent. It took 2 weeks for the word of the war to be over, the peace treaty to get over here, but by that time, the Battle of New Orleans had already happened. But even though, if the Battle of New Orleans, even though it went on, if the British would have won, they would not have honored the peace treaty. They would have kept New Orleans and kept control of Mississippi. That was their idea. That was the reason why they were after New Orleans. They wanted to control the Mississippi River and cut the United States in half. In other words, keeping us from going west of the Mississippi. They would have tried to take over our western states that we had at that time. The Oregon Territory was disputed between the United States and America all the way up until the 1860s and 70s. But there was no states out there. The only state that was out there after that was California, and that was taken over later in the war with Mexico in 1845. Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona was grabbed by us after the Mexican War. But back to the War of 1812. Jackson had a force of only 3,000 men in New Orleans. Anybody know how many Brits there were? 20,000. And 20,000 against 3,000. But Jackson had the upper hand. He had cotton bales, he was well entrenched, and he also had fortifications. He had cannon. The Carolina was a sloop that was along on the Mississippi River. There was a two-pronged attack. Jackson attacked the Brits first and disorganized their camp. So the next morning, the Brits attacked Jackson. And what happened is, and here's the thing about the British Army. Here again, the sharpshooters were knocking off shooting their officers. You had the 93rd Highlanders, you had the 44th of foot, the 42nd of foot. When the Kentuckians and the Tennesseans started their marksmanship, in other words, they started shooting the officers. The #1 officer that was in charge of all the British was Packingham. He was shot 3 times by the marksmen and killed, and even his horse was shot out from underneath him. When he was killed, the British Army kept on marching. As they were marching forward, the American line were laying into them and just cutting them down like wheat. And after the battle was over, Jackson had only lost 30 men as opposed to 2,500 Brits.
Basically, we took out their command, so the soldiers didn't know what to do.
And that's the way the British Army functioned. Whereas our guys, if our officers would have been shot or killed, somebody else would have took over, took charge, and went on fighting. That's why we do so good today. Same thing. So that's what their main aim was to do, is knock off all the officers. That way you cut the head off, the body dies. Anybody got any other questions or any trivia that you know?
Yeah, I know one.
Okay.
Native Americans won't carry a $20 bill because of Jackson's picture on it.
Okay, what Jackson do?
He used the creeks and then abandoned them, let them get killed.
Now, what the Creeks? It was the Chickasaws.
Yeah, Chickasaws, same area.
This year also is a bicentennial for the massacre at Fort Mims, Alabama. That's when the Creek War started, and that's down in Alabama. What it was, Fort Mims was a force of 500 men, women, and children. So the British had stirred up the Indians again, and they massacred the whole fort, killed everybody. So that's when the Kentuckians, here we go again, the Kentuckians and Tennesseans decided to go what's called a punish campaign. What they would do, they go down to the Indian villages sacrifice out their villages and stuff like that. Does anybody know anybody else that's famous that was in the War of 1812? A real famous frontiersman. Who? He's from Tennessee. Who it is? Nope. David Crockett. Boone was from Kentucky, but Boone died in 1826. He was too old to be in the War of 1812. Crockett, David Crockett, Tennessee, was with Colonel Coffey's Horse Mounted Volunteers in Tennessee. They were at the Battle of he was at the Battle of Talladega, Horseshoe Bend. He was there with Jackson. Jackson won both those battles to beat the Creeks. Also, what Jackson did after the war, he abandoned his Chickasaw allies, his Cherokee allies, and everybody knows what, in 1835 what happened, don't you? The Trail of Tears. 35,000 Native Americans died on the way to Oklahoma. And that was Jackson. Jackson done that. Also, Jackson was the most ruthless president at that time. He tried to break the Bank of America. Also, he had fought a duel and had two bullet holes, had 2 bullets next to his heart. Also, he had a scar on the side of his face because during the Revolutionary War, his mother and his brothers were killed by the British Army. A British officer slashed him across the face with a whip because he wouldn't polish his boots. But Jackson had a very, very strong hatred of the British. Anything that was British, he hated. And now he's on the $20 bill. Anybody got any other questions or anything? Okay. Well, there you go, folks. Here's your little history lesson. Thank you. Feel free to talk to the other people. Go over to the First Rifles, go out through the camp and talk to everybody. They like to talk about their stuff.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So maybe this is not a question, but this has been lingering a lot, that I'm not really sure that anybody really won the Revolutionary War or really won the
War of 1812.
the Civil War. When you really look at how
Civil War, I don't call it that. Because my folks are from the South, we call it a war of northern aggression.
well, that's what I'm saying, but I don't really think. I don't know.
Kept their nose out of our business. The slaves would have been freed anyway.
What I'm thinking about here is that exactly what you said and what Jackson said. We end up with people speaking English banking system, English system, roads and houses, like everything. I mean, did we really win, or did we just call it a truce and say, well, okay, we'll call this America, but it's really British America, and then that'll be...
Basically,
yeah.
That's the way it is right now.
Yeah.
We have so much influence all over all the countries of the world, everybody wants to be like us. They want democracy, they speak English. I went to Germany in March, everybody speaks English.
Historian to tell you.
Good, good.
Bill, where'd Bowie come from?
Well, thank you for your time.